A wealthy businessman spends months exchanging anonymous love letters with a mysterious woman who seems to understand his soul perfectly. When they finally meet at a grand party, his reaction sets off a chain of events that will either destroy both their lives or prove that love can overcome generations of prejudice. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Alexander Sterling III sat in his penthouse office overlooking Manhattan, surrounded by evidence of his success, but feeling utterly empty inside. At 35, he had everything money could buy: a billion-dollar investment firm, a fleet of luxury cars, and a black book full of socialites' phone numbers. But tonight, like most nights, he felt nothing but boredom as he looked through the evening's party invitations. "Mr. Sterling, the board meeting is in 10 minutes, his assistant Jennifer reminded him through the intercom. "Tell them I'll be there shortly," he replied, his voice carrying the authority of old money and privilege. Alexander straightened his custom Italian suit and walked to his private elevator. The Sterling name meant something in New York society. His family had been here since the city's early days, and they prided themselves on maintaining what they called proper circles. That evening, at the Metropolitan Club, Alexander found himself surrounded by the usual crowd, wealthy heirs and heiresses, all from the same exclusive social circles. As he sipped his whiskey, he overheard two women discussing a new trend. "It's called letters to strangers," one of them said. "You get matched with an anonymous pen pal. It's supposed to be terribly romantic." Alexander usually dismissed such frivolous trends, but something about it caught his attention. Perhaps it was the third whiskey, or maybe the crushing boredom of having the same conversations with the same people every night. The next morning, fighting against his better judgment, he visited the website. "Experience the lost art of letter writing," the homepage proclaimed. "No names, no pictures, just words from the heart." "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but filled out the profile anyway. He chose the username Manhattan Midnight and wrote a brief introduction about himself, carefully omitting details that might reveal his identity. 2 days later, he received his first letter in his private P.O. box. The handwriting was elegant, the paper expensive. The writer called herself Moonlight Rose. "Dear Manhattan Midnight," the letter began. "I wonder what brings someone to seek connection through letters in this age of instant messages. Perhaps, like me, you find that real conversations have become rare in a world of shallow interactions." Alexander was surprised by how the words resonated with him. This stranger seemed to understand exactly how he felt. He found himself writing back that very night, sharing thoughts he'd never voiced to anyone. Weeks passed, and their correspondence deepened. They discussed literature, music, and their hopes for the future. Alexander found himself rushing to check his P.O. box every day. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen. "I've never told anyone this," he wrote in one letter, "but sometimes I feel like I'm just playing a role, living up to everyone else's expectations." Her reply came 2 days later. "The roles we play often become our prisons, but it's never too late to write a new story for yourself." His friends noticed the change in him. He seemed distracted at parties, less interested in their usual entertainment. Even his mother commented on his behavior at their weekly family dinner. "Darling, you seem different lately," Mrs. Sterling said, studying him over her wine glass. "Jennifer mentioned you've been leaving the office early on Thursdays. Is there someone special we should know about?" "Just taking care of some personal business, Mother," he replied, thinking of how he rushed to the P.O. box every Thursday when the new letters arrived. One night, after a particularly moving letter from Moonlight Rose about following one's heart despite fear, Alexander realized he was falling in love with someone he'd never met. The thought terrified him. It went against everything he'd been taught about maintaining their family's social position. "You're being absurd," his best friend Bradford told him at their weekly squash game. "Love through letters. What is this, a Victorian novel? You need to focus on suitable matches. What about Caroline Astor's daughter?" But Alexander couldn't focus on suitable matches. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Moonlight Rose. Their letters had become more intimate, sharing deeper feelings and dreams. She challenged his views, made him question things he'd always taken for granted. "Sometimes," she wrote, "the things we think define us are actually the bars of our cage." As autumn turned to winter, Alexander found himself changing. He started questioning the prejudices he'd grown up with, the casual cruelty of his social circle, the way they looked down on anyone they deemed different. What he didn't know was that his whole world was about to be turned upside down at the upcoming Sterling Foundation Winter Gala, where fate had planned a meeting that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, prejudice, and his own heart. Maya Washington stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her Yale Law School graduation robe. At 28, she had already accomplished more than most people twice her age. Top of her class, editor of the Law Review, and now an associate position at New York's most prestigious law firm, Harrison & Reed. "Baby girl, I am so proud of you," her mother Sarah said, wiping tears from her eyes. She had worked double shifts as a nurse for 20 years to help Maya achieve her dreams. "We both are," her father James added, straightening his tie. As a high school principal, he had always stressed the importance of education. Maya's success hadn't come easily. She had faced countless obstacles and prejudices, but her parents had taught her to rise above it all with grace and dignity. Still, something was missing in her life. That's why 3 months ago she had signed up for Letters to Strangers. Now, sitting at her desk in her small Manhattan apartment, Maya smiled as she read the latest letter from Manhattan Midnight. His words made her heart race, even though she had no idea what he looked like. Their connection felt real, deep, and honest. "There's something magical about getting to know someone purely through their thoughts," she wrote back, signing as Moonlight Rose. She never mentioned her race in the letters. She wanted to be known for her mind, her heart, and her soul. At Harrison & Reed, Maya quickly made a name for herself. Her brilliant legal mind and dedication impressed even the most demanding partners. But she kept her personal life private, especially her letter-writing hobby. "Maya, you're handling the Sterling Foundation account," her boss announced one morning. "They're our biggest client, and they specifically requested our best." Maya had heard about the Sterlings. Everyone in New York had. Old money, powerful connections, and a reputation for being extremely particular about who they associated with. She had also heard rumors about their prejudices, but she was used to proving people wrong. "The Winter Gala is in 2 weeks, her boss continued. "You'll need to be there to handle any legal matters that come up." That evening, Maya wrote to Manhattan Midnight about feeling nervous about an upcoming event. His reply was warm and encouraging. "Sometimes the moments we fear most become the turning points of our lives." As Maya prepared for the gala, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. She chose a stunning midnight blue gown that her mother helped her pick out. "You look like a queen," Sarah had said, helping her with the final touches. The night of the gala arrived. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom was decorated with thousands of white roses and crystal chandeliers. Maya felt every eye on her as she entered. She was used to being one of the few black faces in these spaces, but she held her head high. She noticed Alexander Sterling III immediately. Everyone did. He commanded attention without even trying, his presence dominating the room. Maya had seen his picture in the papers, but they didn't do him justice. What surprised her was how familiar his mannerisms seemed, the way he tilted his head when listening, how he absently adjusted his cufflinks when thinking. Her heart stopped when she realized why these gestures seemed familiar. They were exactly as Manhattan Midnight had described himself doing in his letters. Could it be? The thought made her dizzy. Throughout the evening, Maya watched Alexander from a distance. Every gesture, every expression confirmed her suspicion. The man she had been pouring her heart out to for months was Alexander Sterling III. She gathered her courage and approached him during a quiet moment. "Mr. Sterling," she said softly, "I believe we might have something in common." His reaction was immediate and cruel. He looked at her with cold disdain, his voice dripping with contempt. "I highly doubt that," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "The help should know their place." The room fell silent. Maya felt the sting of humiliation, but she refused to let him see her pain. Instead, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a familiar piece of paper, his last letter. She placed it on the table next to him. "You're right, Mr. Sterling," she said quietly. Moonlight Rose should have known her place. She turned and walked away, her head held high despite the whispers and stares. Behind her, Alexander picked up the letter, his face draining of color as he recognized his own words. Maya left the gala early, fighting back tears as her car wound through the Manhattan streets. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Remember who you are, baby girl. You're a Washington we don't break." Back at the gala, Alexander stood frozen, the letter trembling in his hands. The beautiful, brilliant woman he had fallen in love with through letters was black. The woman he had just publicly humiliated was the same person who had touched his soul more deeply than anyone ever had. As the reality of what he had done sank in, Alexander felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. The woman who had made him feel truly alive for the first time in his life had just walked away, taking with her any chance of redemption. Or had she? In his pocket, his phone contained the private email address she had shared in her last letter, the one he hadn't read yet. Outside, the New York night sparkled with possibilities and regrets, while inside the grand ballroom, a man's heart waged war with a lifetime of prejudice. Alexander hadn't slept in 3 days since the gala. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maya's face, the hurt in her eyes, the dignity in her posture as she walked away. He had read and reread every letter they had exchanged, seeing them now in a completely different light. "Sir, the board meeting starts in 5 minutes, Jennifer reminded him. "Cancel everything," he said, his voice hoarse. "Cancel the whole week." The news of what happened at the gala spread through New York's high society like wildfire. His mother, Victoria Sterling, burst into his office that afternoon. "Darling, everyone's talking about that incident at the gala," she said, perching herself on his leather sofa. "But don't worry, I've already spoken to the firm. They'll reassign that girl to a different account." Alexander felt sick. "Her name is Maya Washington, Mother, and she's the best lawyer at Harrison and Reed." Victoria's face hardened. "Alexander, dear, I know you're upset, but remember who you are, who we are. The Sterlings have certain standards to maintain." "Standards?" Alexander laughed bitterly. "Like judging people before knowing them? Like humiliating someone because of their skin color?" He pulled out one of Maya's letters. "Listen to this, Mother. True nobility isn't about what we inherit, but what we choose to become." She wrote that. "The woman I publicly humiliated wrote that." Meanwhile, Maya threw herself into her work, staying late at the office every night. Her colleague Sarah Chen watched her with concern. "Maya, you need to go home and rest," Sarah said, bringing her a coffee. "You've been here until midnight every day this week." "I'm fine," Maya insisted, but her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. She hadn't told anyone about the letters or who Manhattan Midnight really was. How could she explain that she had fallen in love with words written by a man who had humiliated her? Her phone was filled with missed calls and messages from an unknown number, Alexander's. She deleted them all without reading them. But then the flowers started arriving at her office. Huge bouquets with cards begging for a chance to explain. She donated them all to the hospital where her mother worked. "Someone's trying hard to get your attention," Sarah commented, watching another delivery arrive. Maya just shook her head. "Some mistakes can't be fixed with flowers." At the Sterling mansion, Alexander faced another battle. His father, Alexander Sterling II, had called an emergency family meeting. "This needs to stop immediately," his father thundered, waving a society magazine with pictures from the gala. "Do you have any idea what this could do to our reputation? To our business?" "Our reputation?" Alexander shot back. "Our reputation for what, father? For looking down on people? For judging them by their skin color instead of their character?" His sister Catherine watched the exchange with growing concern. She had never seen her brother like this. "Alex," she said softly, "what's really going on? This isn't like you." Alexander pulled out the stack of letters he now carried everywhere. "This is who I really am, Kat. These letters, they showed me who I could be, who I want to be, and I threw it all away because I was too proud, too prejudiced to see what was right in front of me." That night, Alexander did something he had never done before. He took the subway to Maya's neighborhood in Brooklyn. He had her address from the firm's files, something he knew was completely inappropriate to use. He stood outside her apartment building in the rain, not caring that his $3,000 suit was getting ruined. Through the window, he could see her silhouette moving around her apartment. Maya noticed him from her window but refused to acknowledge his presence. Instead, she called her parents. "Baby girl," her father said when she told him everything. "Sometimes people deserve a chance to prove they can change, and sometimes they don't. Only you can decide which this is." "But how do I know, Dad?" she asked, watching Alexander's figure still standing in the rain. "The man who wrote those letters, he understood me. He made me feel seen. But the man at the gala, maybe they're both real," her mother chimed in. "People can surprise you, baby, both with how bad and how good they can be." After 2 hours in the rain, Alexander finally left, leaving behind a single letter in her mailbox. Maya retrieved it the next morning. "Dear Moonlight Rose," it began, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve for you to read these words. But the man you knew in those letters, he's real. He's the man I want to be, the man I can be, if you'll give me the chance to prove it." Maya's hands trembled as she read the letter. In her office later that day, she received an unexpected visitor. Catherine Sterling walked in, elegant and poised. "Ms. Washington," Catherine said, "I know my brother hurt you deeply, but in all my life I've never seen him like this. Those letters you exchanged, they changed him. He's challenging everything our family has stood for, fighting with our parents daily, questioning our whole way of life." Maya kept her face neutral. "That's not my responsibility, Miss Sterling." "No, it's not," Catherine agreed. "But maybe it's an opportunity, not just for Alex, but for our whole family to change." As Catherine left, Maya sat at her desk, torn between her head and her heart. The man she had fallen in love with through letters was real. She had seen glimpses of him even in Alexander's cruel facade. But was she willing to risk her heart again? Was she willing to face the storms that would come if she gave him another chance? That evening, as she walked home from work, she saw Alexander waiting outside her building again. This time, instead of ignoring him, she stopped and looked him in the eyes. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "Make them count." 5 minutes isn't much time to apologize for a lifetime of prejudice," Alexander said, standing in front of Maya's building. 4 minutes and 45 seconds now," Maya replied, checking her watch. Alexander took a deep breath. "I won't insult you by making excuses. What I did was unforgivable. But the man who wrote those letters, who shared his dreams and fears with you, that's the real me. The me I've been too cowardly to be." "Words are easy, Mr. Sterling," Maya said coldly. "Actions are what matter. Give me 30 days, Alexander pleaded. 30 days to prove I can be the man from those letters. The man you knew, the man who deserves you." Maya studied him carefully. "And what exactly would these 30 days involve?" "Let me show you," he said, pulling out his phone. "I've already started making changes." He showed her news articles from that morning. Alexander Sterling III had just donated $50 million to establish scholarships for minority students at several universities. He had also appointed 3 new diverse members to his company's board of directors. "That's a start," Maya admitted, "but throwing money at something isn't the same as real change." "I know," Alexander said. "That's why I want to volunteer at your father's school. No cameras, no press, just me trying to make a real difference." Maya's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected that. "And what about your family?" she asked. "Your social circle? Are you ready to face their reaction?" Before Alexander could answer, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Victoria Sterling stepped out, her face twisted with anger. "Alexander, get in the car immediately," she commanded. "This has gone far enough." Alexander didn't move. "No, Mother. For the first time in my life, this is exactly where I need to be." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Think very carefully about what you're doing, darling. Your father is prepared to take drastic measures if this infatuation continues." "Let him," Alexander replied. "I'm not the same man I was a week ago." Maya watched the exchange with mixed emotions. Part of her wanted to walk away from this drama, but another part recognized the courage it took for Alexander to stand up to his mother. Victoria turned to Maya. "My dear, name your price. Whatever it takes for you to disappear from my son's life. 1 million, 5. "Mrs. Sterling," Maya replied calmly, "you've just proven that all your family's money hasn't bought you an ounce of class." Alexander couldn't help but smile, even as his mother gasped in shock. "This isn't over," Victoria warned before getting back in her car. After she left, Maya turned to Alexander. "You realize this is just the beginning. It's going to get much worse." "I know," he said, "but for the first time in my life I'm ready to fight for something real." The next day at Harrison and Reed, Maya found herself called into the senior partner's office. Richard Harrison looked uncomfortable as he spoke. "Maya, the Sterling family has been our client for 3 generations, he began. "And they want me removed from their account," Maya finished for him. "Actually, no," Harrison said, surprising her. "Alexander Sterling called this morning. He specifically requested that you remain as lead counsel. He also threatened to take their business elsewhere if we didn't agree." Maya felt her heart skip a beat. It was a small gesture, but a meaningful one. Over the next few days, Alexander threw himself into volunteer work at James Washington's high school. The students were skeptical at first. What was this rich white man doing in their classroom? But Alexander's genuine interest in their lives and problems slowly won them over. "You're different from what I expected," James told Alexander, after watching him spend hours helping students with their college applications. "I'm trying to be," Alexander replied honestly. "Your daughter, she made me see things I'd been blind to my whole life." Maya heard about Alexander's work at the school from her father's daily phone calls. She also noticed the changes at his company: new diversity initiatives, mentorship programs, community outreach efforts. But not everyone was happy about these changes. Bradford, Alexander's best friend, confronted him at their club. "What are you doing, Alex?" Bradford demanded. "First you embarrass yourself over this woman, now you're turning the company into some sort of charity. The board is getting nervous." "The board?" Alexander laughed. "You mean my father's old friends who've been running things their way for decades? It's time for change, Brad, real change." That evening, Maya received another letter from Alexander, but this one was different from his previous apologies. "Dear Maya," it read, "today I helped a young man named Marcus with his college essay. He wants to be a doctor, but nobody in his family has ever gone to college. Sitting there listening to his dreams, I realized something. The man I was before would have seen him as a statistic. The man I am now sees him as a reminder of why I need to be better. Thank you for opening my eyes." Maya found herself smiling as she read the letter. The next day, she sent a short reply to his office. "Dinner, tonight, 7 p.m. My choice of restaurant." Alexander's heart raced when he read her note. Progress at last. But as he prepared to leave his office that evening, his father walked in, accompanied by 2 board members. "Son," Alexander Sterling II said grimly, "we need to talk about the future of this company and your place in it." Alexander faced his father across the massive mahogany conference table, tension thick in the air. 2 senior board members, Harold Winston and George Porter, sat like vultures waiting to strike. "The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," his father announced. "They're voting on whether to remove you as CEO." "On what grounds?" Alexander demanded. "Reckless management," Harold Winston said, sliding over a document. "Your recent decisions have caused our stock to drop 15 points. Major investors are nervous about your new direction." Alexander scanned the paper, his jaw tightening. "This is about Maya, isn't it? This is about protecting our legacy," his father corrected. "Everything I built, everything my father built, you're throwing it all away for some misguided infatuation." "Misguided?" Alexander stood up, his voice rising. "I'm making our company better, more inclusive, bringing in fresh perspectives. The only thing that's misguided is clinging to outdated prejudices." His phone buzzed, Maya's message reminding him about dinner. He was already late. "Think carefully about tomorrow's vote," his father warned as Alexander headed for the door. "Once this is done, it can't be undone." Maya waited at Sylvia's soul food restaurant in Harlem, checking her watch again. The place was busy, filled with regular folks enjoying good food, a far cry from Alexander's usual fine dining spots. When he finally arrived, 45 minutes late, his face was drawn with worry. "I'm so sorry," he said, sliding into the booth. "There's a situation at the company." "I know," Maya cut him off. "The vote tomorrow. News travels fast in corporate law circles." She had ordered for both of them, fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, and cornbread. Alexander looked at the food with surprise. "Best soul food in New York," Maya said. "My grandma used to say you can tell a lot about a person by how they handle being out of their comfort zone." Alexander picked up his fork, determined to prove himself. The first bite of chicken made his eyes widen. "This is incredible. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we've been taught to avoid," Maya said pointedly. As they ate, Alexander opened up about the board meeting. Maya listened carefully, her legal mind already working. "They can't remove you without cause," she said, "and these allegations are thin at best." "My father has a lot of influence," Alexander replied. "Most of the board members owe their positions to him." Maya reached into her briefcase and pulled out a file. "Good thing I did some research. 3 of your new diversity initiatives have already resulted in profitable partnerships. And that scholarship program? It's generated more positive press than anything the company's done in decades." Alexander stared at her. "You did all this research? Why?" "Because," Maya hesitated, "because I believe the man from those letters is worth fighting for." Their eyes met across the table, the connection they'd built through months of letters still burning strong. But before either could speak, Alexander's phone exploded with messages. Someone had leaked photos of them at dinner to the press. Social media was ablaze with comments, many of them ugly and racist. Alexander's face darkened as he read them. "I'm so sorry you have to deal with this," he said. Maya's phone rang. It was her boss. "Maya, the Sterling family's lawyer just called. They're demanding you recuse yourself from all Sterling business due to conflict of interest." "They can't do that," Maya protested. "I've done nothing unethical. They're threatening to pull all their business if we don't comply." After hanging up, Maya explained the situation to Alexander. His response surprised her. "Let them pull their business," he said firmly. "I'll start my own company if I have to." "You'd give up everything?" Maya asked. "Your family legacy, your inheritance? What good is a legacy built on prejudice?" He reached across the table and took her hand. "The man I was before meeting you cared about all that. The man I am now cares about what's right." As they left the restaurant, they found reporters waiting outside. Camera flashes exploded as Alexander took Maya's hand defiantly. "Mr. Sterling, is it true you're being forced out of the company? Miss Washington, are you using Mr. Sterling to advance your career?" Alexander faced the cameras. "I have a statement to make," he announced. "Tomorrow, the Sterling Investment Group's board will vote on my future as CEO. They think they're voting on whether to preserve their outdated values or embrace change. But what they're really voting on is whether our company will remain stuck in the past or move forward into a better future." Maya squeezed his hand supportively as he continued. "And yes, I am dating Maya Washington. She's brilliant, accomplished, and has shown me what real character looks like. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to sell their shares in my company." The next morning, Alexander walked into the board meeting with his head held high. Maya had stayed up late helping him prepare his defense, but as he entered the conference room, he was surprised to see his sister Catherine already there, engaged in intense conversations with board members. "What's going on?" he asked her. Catherine smiled. "Did you really think I'd let them destroy my big brother? I've spent the night reminding certain board members about some of their past indiscretions. Amazing how many skeletons come tumbling out when you start opening closets." Before Alexander could respond, their father burst in, his face red with anger. He was waving a tablet showing the morning's headlines. "Sterling Heir challenges corporate culture. Love knows no color. You've gone too far," he thundered. "This ends now." "You're right, father," Alexander replied calmly. "It does end now, but not the way you think." The Sterling Group's boardroom crackled with tension as Alexander stood at the head of the table. 12 pairs of eyes stared back at him. Old money, old power, old prejudices. "Before we vote," Alexander began, "I have some information to share." His father interrupted. "This meeting has one purpose, to vote on your removal as CEO." "Actually," Catherine chimed in, standing beside her brother, "as a major shareholder, I've amended the agenda." She passed out folders to each board member. As they opened them, faces began to pale. Alexander watched with satisfaction. His sister's overnight investigation had uncovered more dirt than he'd imagined. "Harold," Catherine said sweetly, addressing one of the oldest board members, "I'm particularly interested in your private account in the Cayman Islands, the one where you've been hiding money from your wife's divorce lawyer." Harold's face turned ashen. "And George," she continued, "those trips to Vegas you've been billing as business expenses? Fascinating how many occurred at the same time as certain showgirl performances." Victoria Sterling burst into the room, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. "Alexander, stop this nonsense immediately." "Mother," Alexander replied calmly, "perfect timing. We were just discussing family values." Maya's legal research had been thorough. Every board member who'd conspired with his father had skeletons in their closets, and Catherine had found them all. "This is blackmail," his father sputtered. "No," Alexander corrected. "This is business. Something you taught me very well, father. Now, let's talk about the real vote today. My proposal for company-wide diversity initiatives and a new charitable foundation." The board members shifted uncomfortably, looking at their folders, then at Catherine's knowing smile. Meanwhile, Maya sat in her office at Harrison and Reed, trying to focus on work, but constantly checking her phone. The door opened and Sarah Chen rushed in. "Maya, turn on the news, quick." The financial news was running breaking coverage. Breaking: Sterling Group announces major corporate restructuring. Alexander Sterling III confirmed as CEO with expanded powers. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "We won. Dinner tonight?" But before she could reply, Victoria Sterling walked into her office unannounced. "Ms. Washington," she said, her voice icily polite, "I believe we got off on the wrong foot." Maya stood, matching Victoria's stern gaze. "Mrs. Sterling, I have a meeting in 5 minutes." "This won't take long." Victoria pulled out a checkbook. "Name your price. Not to leave my son's life. I realize now that won't work. No, this is a different offer." Maya waited, curious despite herself. "Marry him," Victoria said. Maya blinked in surprise. Excuse me? If this relationship is inevitable, let's at least do it properly. A society wedding, full press coverage, showing how progressive the Sterling family is. You'll have wealth, status, everything a woman could want. Maya felt her blood boil. Everything except self-respect. Don't be naive, Victoria pressed. You could do a lot of good with Sterling money. Help your community, support causes you believe in. Mrs. Sterling, Maya replied, her voice steady. If I ever marry your son, it will be because we love each other, not because you're trying to control the narrative. Victoria's facade cracked slightly. Love? Do you really think love is enough to overcome generations of difference? The stares, the whispers, the country club friends who'll suddenly have other commitments? Those sound like your problems, not mine, Maya said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. As Victoria left, Maya's mother called. Baby girl, have you seen the society pages? They're calling you the woman who tamed Alexander Sterling. I didn't tame anyone, Mom, Maya sighed. He changed because he wanted to. That evening, Alexander picked Maya up in his Ferrari, the same one from their early letter days. As they drove through the city, he seemed nervous. There's somewhere special I want to take you, he said. They pulled up to a community center in Brooklyn. Inside, Maya was surprised to see dozens of teenagers working at new computers. Remember Marcus, the student who wanted to be a doctor, Alexander said. He mentioned that most kids in his neighborhood couldn't afford computers for college applications. So, you bought them computers, Maya finished, touched by the gesture. Actually, I bought the building. It's the first of many Sterling education centers we're planning to open. Maya turned to him, tears in her eyes. You did all this in one day? I had the idea weeks ago, he admitted. I just needed to win the board vote to make it happen. As they watched the teenagers working, Alexander took Maya's hand. My mother came to see you today. News travels fast, Maya said. She told me about her offer. He turned to face her. Maya, I need you to know something. I don't want to marry you to make a statement or to prove anything to anyone. Maya's heart skipped a beat. Alexander, let me finish, he said softly. When I marry you, and I hope someday you'll let me, it will be because you're the woman who saw the real me through nothing but words on paper, the woman who made me want to be better, the woman I love. Before Maya could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Through the windows they could see Alexander Sterling II getting out of his car, followed by several men in suits. Security, Alexander muttered. He's making one last play. For what? Maya asked. For everything. Alexander Sterling II stormed into the community center, his presence filling the room with tension. The teenagers stopped their work, sensing the drama unfolding. You think you've won? He bellowed at his son. You think a few threats and some dirt on the board members ends this? Alexander stepped in front of Maya protectively. The teenagers are trying to work, Father. Let's take this outside. Oh, now you care about these people? His father gestured around the room. Is this what the Sterling fortune has come to? Handouts and feel-good projects? Maya stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Sterling, these students are preparing for college interviews. Your son is investing in their future. Their future? He laughed bitterly. What about our family's future? Our legacy? What legacy? Alexander challenged. The legacy of excluding people, of judgment and prejudice. The security team his father had brought started moving toward Alexander, but Catherine burst through the door. Stop right there. She held up her phone. The press is on their way. Do you really want them to see Sterling Security roughing up their CEO at a charity center? Alexander Sterling II's face reddened. Catherine, you too, after everything I've given you both. You gave us privilege, Father, Catherine said. But Maya gave Alexander something more valuable, the courage to be better than his upbringing. One of the teenagers, Marcus, stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, sir, can I say something? Alexander's father turned, surprised by the interruption. Your son helped me write my college essay today, Marcus continued. He didn't just throw money at us. He sat with me for hours, sharing his own college experiences. That's the kind of legacy that matters. Maya watched Alexander's face soften with pride at Marcus's words. This was the man she'd fallen in love with through those letters, the one who had always been there, buried under years of prejudice and expectation. It's over, Father, Alexander said quietly. The board voted. The press release is out. The Sterling Group is changing. You think I don't have options? His father snarled. I still own 30% of the company shares. 20%, Catherine corrected. I convinced Aunt Margaret to sign her shares over to me this morning. She was quite impressed with Alexander's plans for the company. Victoria Sterling chose that moment to walk in, surprising everyone. "Robert," she said to her husband, "enough." "Victoria, don't interfere," he warned. "I've spent 30 years standing quietly by while you ruled this family like a dictator," she said. "I watched you turn our son into a copy of yourself, and I said nothing. But today, looking at him standing here, fighting for what he believes in, I've never been prouder." Alexander stared at his mother in shock. She walked over and took his hand. "The world is changing," she continued, addressing her husband. "Our son understood that before we did. The question is, will you change with it or be left behind?" The security team shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to do. Alexander Sterling II looked around the room, at the hopeful faces of the teenagers, at his daughter's determined expression, at his wife's quiet strength, and finally at his son standing hand in hand with Maya. "You really love her?" he asked Alexander, his voice suddenly tired. "More than anything," Alexander replied without hesitation. His father sank into a nearby chair, suddenly looking old. "Your grandfather would roll over in his grave." "Maybe it's time he did," Catherine suggested gently. Maya stepped forward and did something unexpected. She sat down next to Alexander Sterling II. "Mr. Sterling," she said softly, "my father taught me that real strength isn't about holding on to power. It's about knowing when to let go and trust the next generation to do better." The room fell silent, waiting. Finally, Alexander's father looked up at his son. "The company is yours," he said. "Don't destroy everything we built." "I won't destroy it," Alexander promised. "I'll make it better." As his father stood to leave, he paused by Maya. "You're either very brave or very foolish to take on this family." Maya smiled. "Maybe a little of both." After his parents left, with Catherine accompanying them, Alexander turned to Maya. "I can't believe my mother stood up to him like that," he said, still amazed. "Sometimes love makes us braver than we think we can be," Maya replied. The teenagers had returned to their work, but Marcus approached them again. "Does this mean the center gets to stay open?" he asked hopefully. Alexander grinned. "Actually, we're expanding it. How would you like to be our first paid intern once you start college?" Marcus's face lit up, but Maya raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that getting ahead of ourselves?" she asked. "He hasn't even applied yet." "Oh, I have faith in him," Alexander said, winking at Marcus. "I know potential when I see it." Later that night, as they walked through Central Park, Maya noticed Alexander was unusually quiet. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she asked. "I was just thinking about our first letters," he said. "How ironic that I had to be completely blind to who you were to finally see you clearly." Maya stopped walking and turned to face him. "The question is, what do you see now?" Alexander took both her hands in his. "I see my future, if you'll have me." Before she could respond, both their phones buzzed with breaking news alerts. Someone had leaked Alexander's father's outburst at the community center to the press. Social media was exploding with video clips and commentary. "Your father's going to be furious," Maya sighed. "Let him be," Alexander said. "I'm done hiding who I am and who I love." He pulled out a familiar piece of paper, the first letter she'd ever written to him. "Sometimes the greatest act of courage is letting the world see your true heart," he read from her words. "You taught me that, Maya. Now it's time to show the world what real change looks like." Maya looked at him thoughtfully. "You know this won't be easy. There will always be people who disapprove. Good thing I've got a brilliant lawyer on my side," he smiled, "and something worth fighting for." The morning after the confrontation at the community center, Maya woke up to find her face splashed across every major news website. "Sterling's secret love, the woman who changed an empire," read one headline. "Love letters that shook Wall Street," proclaimed another. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Old college friends, distant relatives, and even her high school teachers were calling to comment on her relationship with Alexander. "Baby girl," her mother said during their morning call, "there are reporters camped outside our house." "Mom, I'm so sorry," Maya started, but her mother cut her off. "Don't you dare apologize. Your father is out there right now, serving them coffee and telling everyone how proud we are of you." At Sterling Tower, Alexander faced his own media circus. As he walked into the lobby, reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Sterling, is it true you met through an anonymous letter-writing service? Are the rumors about your father's opposition to the relationship true? Will Ms. Washington be joining the company board?" Bradford, Alexander's old friend, was waiting in his office. "You've really done it this time, Alex," he said, tossing a newspaper onto the desk. The old guard is in an uproar. 3 major investors have already called threatening to pull out. Let them, Alexander replied calmly. For every investor we lose, we'll gain 2 new ones who believe in our vision. Your vision? Bradford scoffed. Or hers? Alexander's eyes hardened. Careful, Brad. You're talking about the woman I love. The woman you love, Bradford laughed bitterly. The woman who's turned you against everything and everyone you've known your whole life. Wake up, Alex. She's using you to advance her own agenda. Get out, Alexander said quietly. What? I said get out. And don't come back until you're ready to apologize to both me and Maya. As Bradford stormed out, Catherine walked in. Well, that looked intense, she said. But we have bigger problems. Someone leaked all your letters to the press. Alexander felt his heart sink. Those letters were private, intimate exchanges between him and Maya. At Harrison & Reed, Maya was dealing with her own crisis. The managing partners had called an emergency meeting. Maya, Richard Harrison began, while we support your personal life choices, this situation has created complications. Complications? Maya asked, although she knew exactly what he meant. Several major clients have expressed concern about possible conflicts of interest. They're worried that your relationship with Alexander Sterling might compromise their confidentiality. My personal life has nothing to do with my professional capabilities, Maya stated firmly. Of course not, Harrison agreed quickly. But perception is everything in our business. We think it might be best if you took a leave of absence until this dies down. Maya stood up. A leave of absence. After 7 years of perfect service. After bringing in more clients than any other associate? Maya, please understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, she said, pulling out a letter from her briefcase. This is my resignation. And just so you know, Alexander and I discussed this possibility weeks ago. He's starting a new legal foundation focused on civil rights and corporate responsibility. They need a director. Harrison's face paled. Maya, let's not be hasty. But she was already walking out. In the hallway, she ran into Sarah Chen. You're not getting rid of me that easily, Sarah grinned. I already submitted my resignation too. Someone needs to help you run that foundation. Maya hugged her friend, fighting back tears. Meanwhile, Alexander was dealing with the fallout from the leaked letters. He sat in his office, reading their private words, now splashed across the internet for everyone to dissect. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Have you seen the news? I'm so sorry, he replied. I never wanted our private moments exposed like this. Meet me at our spot in Central Park. We need to talk. Those words made his heart freeze. When he arrived at their bench near the lake, Maya was already waiting. Before you say anything, he started, I swear I had nothing to do with leaking those letters. I know, Maya said softly. Your father's assistant confessed. Apparently, he was hoping the letters would embarrass us both into ending things. Alexander sat beside her. How are you holding up? I resigned from Harrison & Reed today, she said. Maya, no, it was time. She cut him off. But that's not why I asked you here. Have you read the comments people are making about our letters? Alexander nodded grimly. While some people were touched by their love story, others were vicious in their criticism. They're calling me a gold digger, Maya continued, saying I manipulated you, that I planned this all along. Maya, nobody who knows you would believe that. And they're calling you a traitor to your race, she added, saying you've lost your mind, that I've brainwashed you. Alexander took her hand. Do you remember what you wrote in your 3rd letter to me? The opinions of those who don't know your heart should never determine its direction. Maya smiled despite herself. You memorized my letters? Every word, he admitted. Maya, I don't care what they say about me, but I won't let them hurt you. That's just it, she said. You can't protect me from this. The question is, are we strong enough to face it together? Before Alexander could respond, they were interrupted by the flash of cameras. Paparazzi had found them. This is our new normal, Maya said quietly. Are you sure this is what you want? Alexander stood up and faced the photographers. You want a story? He called out. Here's your story. He turned back to Maya, got down on one knee, and pulled out a small box. Alexander, what are you doing? Maya gasped. Something I should have done the moment I read your first letter, he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. Maya Washington, you showed me who I could be. You made me brave enough to change. Will you marry me? The cameras went crazy, but Alexander and Maya barely noticed them. In that moment they were back in their own world, where only their words and hearts mattered. But as Maya looked at the ring, a new text message appeared on her phone. The sender was unknown, but the message was clear. Stop now or everyone you love will pay the price. Maya stared at her phone, her hand trembling. Around them, cameras continued to flash, capturing what should have been their perfect moment. Yes, she said to Alexander, forcing a smile. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the photographers erupted in excitement. But Maya's mind was on the threatening message. Later that night, in Alexander's penthouse, Maya finally showed him the text. "We need to call the police," Alexander said immediately. "And tell them what?" Maya asked. "That someone sent a vague threat. They'll say it's probably just a racist troll. Then I'll hire private security for you and your family." Maya paced the room. "Alexander, my parents already have reporters camping outside their house. Adding security guards will only make things worse." Another text arrived. "Your father's school, your mother's hospital. So many accidents can happen." Maya felt her blood run cold. This wasn't just a troll. This person knew details about her family. "It has to be Bradford," Alexander said, his face dark with anger. "Or any of your father's other allies," Maya added. "We've made a lot of enemies lately." The next morning, Maya visited her parents despite Alexander's protests about her going alone. "Baby girl," her father said, hugging her tight, "we saw the proposal on the news. Beautiful ring." But Maya noticed something was wrong. Her mother's usually immaculate garden was vandalized, flowers trampled and uprooted. "It happened last night," her mother explained. "But don't worry, the neighbors are helping me replant everything." "This is my fault," Maya said, fighting back tears. "No," her father said firmly. "This is the fault of small-minded people who fear change, and we don't bow to fear in this family." When Maya returned to her apartment, she found Catherine waiting for her. "Congratulations on the engagement," Catherine said, hugging her. "But we have a problem. Someone's been digging into your past." "What do you mean?" "A private investigator contacted one of our security team members. They're offering serious money for any dirt on you." Maya sank into a chair. "They won't find anything." "That's the problem," Catherine said. "When they don't find real dirt, people like this tend to create it." As if on cue, Maya's phone buzzed with a news alert. Her heart stopped as she read the headline, "Sterling's fiancée, a hidden past." The article was filled with insinuations and twisted half-truths. They'd dug up an old photo of her at a college protest, claiming she was anti-business and radical. They'd even interviewed an ex-boyfriend who claimed she'd always talked about marrying rich. Maya threw her phone across the room. "I can't do this to him, Catherine. His reputation, his company." "Stop right there," Catherine interrupted. "My brother has never been happier or more purposeful than he is with you. Don't let them win." But the attacks continued. That afternoon, Marcus called from the community center. "Ms. Washington, someone broke in last night. They destroyed all the new computers." When Alexander heard about the community center, he was furious. He called an emergency press conference. "I know who's behind these attacks," he announced to the gathered reporters. "To those people I say this, come after me if you want, but leave innocent people out of it." Bradford watched the press conference from his office, his face troubled. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "It's gone too far," he said to the person on the other end. "I wanted to scare them apart, not cause actual harm." "You hired me to solve a problem," the voice replied. "Let me do my job." That evening, Maya sat alone in her apartment, reading the latest series of threatening texts. Each one mentioned a different person she loved. Her parents, her friends, the kids at the community center. Alexander called, worried when she didn't show up for dinner. "Maya, where are you? I've been waiting at the restaurant." She took a deep breath, tears rolling down her face. "I can't marry you, Alexander." "What? Maya, what are you talking about?" "This was a beautiful dream," she said, her voice breaking. "But that's all it was. A dream. We were fooling ourselves thinking we could change generations of hatred." "Maya, listen to me. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it together." "No, we can't. Not this time." She looked down at the engagement ring. "I love you too much to watch everything you've built get destroyed because of me." "Maya, please. Goodbye, Alexander." She hung up and finally let herself break down, sobbing. On her coffee table, their published letters lay scattered across the newspaper coverage of their engagement. Such beautiful words, such impossible dreams. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number. Smart choice. Now leave town, or the next message won't be just words. Meanwhile, Alexander was already in his car, racing toward her apartment. He called Catherine. "Something's wrong," he said. "Maya's trying to break off the engagement. This isn't like her." "The threats must have escalated," Catherine replied. "I've been doing some digging." You'll never guess whose private number those texts are coming from. Whose? Father's lawyer, James Morrison. Alexander's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That means, yes, Catherine confirmed. Father is behind all of it. But as Alexander pulled up to Maya's building, he saw her getting into a taxi with a suitcase. Maya, he shouted, running toward her. She looked at him through the taxi window, her face streaked with tears as the car pulled away. Alexander stood in the street, watching the taxi disappear into the Manhattan traffic. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Some things are better left in letters, son. She's gone. Accept it. Alexander's reply was immediate. You don't know me very well, Father. This isn't over. In the taxi, Maya clutched her bag containing all their letters. The driver asked, Where to, miss? She looked back at Alexander's diminishing figure in the rear window. JFK Airport, she said quietly. And hurry, please. But what neither Maya nor Alexander knew was that Catherine wasn't the only one who had been investigating. Sarah Chen had discovered something that would change everything, something about Alexander Sterling II's past that he had kept hidden for 30 years. And it involved Maya's family in ways no one could have imagined. Sarah Chen raced through the rainy Manhattan streets, clutching a manila envelope. She had to reach Alexander before Maya's flight took off. Pick up, she muttered, calling Alexander again. When he finally answered, she could hear traffic noise in the background. I'm heading to JFK, he said. I can't talk right now. Alexander, wait. Your father, I found something. It's about why he's really doing this. Meanwhile, at JFK Airport, Maya sat at her gate, staring at her engagement ring. Her phone was filled with messages from Alexander that she couldn't bear to read. Flight 237 to London now boarding, the announcer called. Maya stood up, but a familiar voice stopped her. Running away isn't the answer, Victoria Sterling said, approaching with Catherine beside her. Mrs. Sterling, how did you know you'd be here? Victoria finished. Because 30 years ago, I was in your exact position. Maya sat back down, confused. Before I married Alexander's father, Victoria continued, I was engaged to someone else, someone his family didn't approve of. What happened? I gave in to the threats. I chose safety over love. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I've regretted it every day since. Catherine stepped forward. Maya, there's more. Sarah found something in Father's old papers. Across town, Alexander was stuck in traffic, listening to Sarah's revelation on speakerphone. For your father had a brother, Sarah explained. James Sterling. He fell in love with a black woman in college. Your grandfather threatened to cut him off, but James didn't care. Alexander's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. What happened to him? He died in a car accident in 1985. But Alexander, it wasn't an accident. Your grandfather's lawyers arranged it to look that way. What? That's why your father's doing this, Sarah continued. He's not just worried about the family name. He's terrified history will repeat itself. Back at the airport, Maya listened in shock as Victoria and Catherine shared the same story. Robert never forgave his father, Victoria explained, but instead of breaking the cycle, he became even more rigid, more controlling. He's not really fighting against you, Maya. He's fighting against his own guilt. Maya's flight made its final boarding call. I can't risk Alexander's life, Maya said, standing up, or my family's safety. Then don't, Catherine replied. Fight back instead. At that moment, Alexander Sterling II walked into the terminal, flanked by security guards. That's enough, he commanded. Maya's made her choice. No, Father. Alexander's voice rang out as he ran up to them, out of breath. You made a choice 30 years ago to let fear win, but that ends today. He turned to Maya, taking her hands in his. I know about Uncle James. I know why you're running. But I'm not him and you're not going anywhere. Alexander, Maya started, your father's right. Look at all the damage this has caused. The only damage, Alexander Sterling II interrupted, his voice suddenly tired, is what fear and hatred have done to this family for generations. Everyone turned to look at him in surprise. James was braver than I ever was, he continued. When our father threatened him, he chose love. I chose money and power. And I've lived with that shame every day since his death. Tears rolled down his face. I told myself I was protecting you, son, but I was just afraid. Afraid to face what this family did to my brother. Afraid to admit that he was right and we were wrong. Maya stepped toward him. Mr. Sterling, we can't change the past, but we can choose a different future. Alexander's father looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Morrison, call off everything. The investigations, the threats, all of it. It's over. He turned to Alexander and Maya. I can't bring my brother back, but maybe I can help his story end differently this time. Victoria took her husband's hand, tears in her eyes. James would be proud of you, Robert. 3 months later, the Sterling Building's grand ballroom was transformed for a very different kind of event. Maya walked down the aisle in a stunning white gown, her father beside her. The room was filled with faces from both their worlds. Wall Street executives next to community center students, society matrons beside Maya's mother's hospital colleagues. Alexander beamed as she approached. Behind him, Marcus stood proudly as his best man, wearing his new Yale pre-med program jacket. Bradford, who had helped expose his own role in the threats and made amends, sat quietly in the back, learning what real friendship meant. As Maya and Alexander exchanged vows, Catherine smiled at Sarah, both of them knowing their investigation had helped love triumph over fear. Alexander Sterling II watched his son marry the woman he loved, finally understanding what his brother had known all those years ago, that love was worth any price. Maya's father's voice shook with emotion as he gave the final toast, to letters that became love, to fear that became courage, and to a family that learned to change. Later that night, after the celebrations, Alexander and Maya stood on their penthouse balcony overlooking the city. I have something for you, Alexander said, pulling out a familiar-looking envelope. Maya opened it to find a letter in his handwriting. My dearest Moonlight Rose, once we fell in love through words on paper, neither of us knowing where they would lead. Today, I make you a new promise. Every day for the rest of our lives, I will write our story together with you. A story of love that overcame hate, of courage that defeated fear, and of two hearts that found each other when they needed it most. All my love, your Manhattan Midnight. Maya smiled through her tears and pulled out her own letter. Great minds think alike, she said, handing it to him. As they read each other's words in the moonlight, a new chapter began. Their story had started with hidden letters, but it would continue in the open, for all the world to see, a testament to love's power to change hearts, challenge prejudices, and write new endings to old stories. In his office downtown, Alexander Sterling II opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old, faded photograph of himself and his brother James. For the first time in 30 years, he smiled at the memory instead of hiding from it, and somewhere, perhaps, James Sterling was smiling too, knowing that love had finally won in the family he'd left behind. The end.